Revelation 18, and we are going to actually finish out the chapter tonight. It's a lot of verses, but it's all kind of surrounding the same topic here. So Revelation chapter 18, verse number 9, and just before we read it, we've been talking about the fall of Babylon. That's what 17 and 18, that's what these chapters are about. Chapter 17, we talked about how that was the ecclesiastical side, the religious side of Babylon, and then it was done away with. You can read there at the end of the chapter, done away with sometime around that midpoint period of the tribulation. Chapter 18 is talking about the political, economic side of the empire of Babylon. And so that's kind of just a little bit of background there. I know it's been a few weeks since we actually discussed this. But Revelation chapter 18, starting in verse 9, it says, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off with the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city! For in 1 hour is thy judgment come, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver, precious stones, of pearls, fine linen, and purple, and silk, and scarlet, and all fine wood, and manner vessels of ivory, and manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off with the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches has come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company and ships and sailors and as many as trade by the sea stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city, wherein was made rich all that had ships in the sea, by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and you holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of harpers, and musicians, and of pipers, and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee. And no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. All right, well, after being told of the great fall of Babylon, which is what happened at the beginning of this chapter, John is now shown the great lament of the city by those who were made rich through the wickedness of this particular city. Now, we know that this corrupt political and economic empire has survived up to this point through the consistent judgments of God. Right? I mean, this is it had a little bit of staying power. After consistent judgment, the empire has stood. Obviously, by this point, we are well into the Great Tribulation. We are probably only just a few moments away, maybe a few hours from the return of Christ. So we are well into the Great Tribulation. They have made it through thus far. And this capital, which is really what chapter 18 is talking about, the capital city, which we've discussed this in the past, it could possibly be the actual Babylon rebuilt. It could be some other city that is just kind of labeled Babylon, whatever the case may be. Wherever the capital may be, it has this symbol of hope for the people who are invested in this particular system, have taken the mark, are worshiping the beast, are doing all these things. Through constant judgment after judgment, the earthquakes, the stars falling, all the things we read about, well, yeah, but our city still stands. And so it's been kind of the symbol of hope. And so as long as Babylon stands, in their minds, this great empire, it's going to last. It's going to make it. And so, however, as we have seen and has been prophesied throughout the whole Bible, not just Revelation, the city is going to fall, and with that city, their hope falls with it. Now, of course, like I said, we're talking about just perhaps a few moments, maybe just a few hours until the return of Christ. but this event probably does take prior happen just prior to the return of Christ. And so when I say their hope falls, well, it's about to fall a whole lot more. But in this moment, they're seeing this city fall, and it of course represents the empire. And of course, that just kind of made me think of the events of today, with what was happening down at the Capitol building. Now, as far as I know, the last report I saw that they've gotten everybody out of there, and things are at least seemingly back to normal. But let's just say perhaps that they did overtake the building and they burnt it to ashes. You can just imagine tomorrow morning the headlines around the world would be, is this the end of America? Is America falling? If they were to see our capital city on fire, that would be the image. That would be the lasting image. Is America done for? Whether or not it was, the hope of America would really be trembling. People all over the world would think, well, this is it. This is the end. Now, thankfully, that didn't happen. But you can just kind of imagine what would take place. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen here. This is the capital of this tremendous empire, and it is going to fall. And it's going to go up in smoke, and the people are going to see this, and they're going to lament, and they're going to cry out, and they're going to wail. And so the kings of the earth, now we've talked about these guys a little bit, but the kings of the earth, we understand that the Antichrist will kind of break the globe into divisions, and naturally there will be people in positions of leadership over those divisions. It's just a separation of power just a little bit there. And so these are the kings he's talking about. But the kings of the earth, the text says they're going to bewail and they're going to lament. Now they're going to cry out because of their loss. Now this is indicative to me of the prevailing wickedness of the system, because it's not just a cry over a loss of power. That's part of it. But the cry really is the loss of a way of life. The system is so evil and so wicked. We see that they have committed fornication and lived deliciously, or that word means luxuriously, with her. It has made them into something that, yes, they have power, but they have everything that their evil heart could ever desire. And that's all gone along with the power, along with the money. And so it's not just a financial thing for the kings of the earth. It's all the wickedness and the debauchery and all the things that they have been involved with that this empire afforded them because of their position. That's all gone away now. And so they're lamenting and they're bewailing. You saw the weeping and the wailing. And then there's another group. We see the merchants of the earth. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her. Now, theirs is more of a financial aspect, and so their way of financial gain is gone. Now, remember that up to this point, what we say back in chapter 13, unless somebody has taken the mark, unless somebody is worshiping the beast, you do not buy or you do not sell. And so these merchants are knee-deep into this system, and the only way that they're selling their goods, whatever they may be, the only way they're selling their goods is through this particular empire. And so when the empire falls, well, there goes their financial gain. And so they're weeping and they're mourning. And so these are businessmen, and you can only imagine how businessmen would react to something like this. Now, they won't be able to sell. There was a long list there in verses 12 and 13. They won't be able to sell any of these things that are listed there in these verses. And I just wanted to make one quick note about the things that you see there. We won't go cover all of them. But there in verses 12 and 13, I think there's 28. I think that's the right number. There's 28 things listed in those two verses. And not one of them is a necessary item. Of all the things that they're selling, these are all luxury items. Because we see in verse 14, it is what their souls lusted after. Again, this is the debauchery of the system. This is the financial gain of the system. And now most notable is that there at the end of verse 13, where it talks about slaves and the souls of men. This is also going to be a currency, as it were, in this particular system. Now, contrary to what a lot of people think, slave labor is vibrant today. It did not end in 1865. I think a lot of people have this misconception about slavery. It happens in different forms even in our own country, but it is rampant in countries all over the world, even what we would view as what happened here in America. But it is still a common aspect of our day today, but it is going to be even more common under this evil empire, and it's not going to be a hidden thing. It's just going to be out there in the open. Hey, you need some labor, just go get you some slaves. And so this is going to be something that's going to come back into play. And then we see here these kind of a song of lament in these next few verses. And so we see the kings, we see the merchants, and the distributors all join in a song of lament that will encapsulate the materialism of the day. Now, I don't have to explain to you materialism. Materialism is bad now. And I think probably what brings to light the materialism of our country is holidays. I think maybe more than anything else, you see the materialistic notion of our country around these particular days. But it's going to find its fever pitch during the tribulation. Materialism is going to reign supreme. They will lament. We see a couple of statements. For in 1 hour, so great riches has come to naught. And then another similar phrase a little bit later. Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made riches. All that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness, for in 1 hour is she made desolate. They're wailing and they're singing this song of lament because of the vast materialism, the hold it has on their heart. This is the sentiment. It is a cry for the riches that fueled their sinful way of life that we talked about earlier. The words of James 5, I think, well describe the day that John is writing about here. James writes, "You have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you." Obviously, we see a little bit of that in our world today, but again, it is going to reign supreme during the tribulation. There's no repentance, there's no guilt, there is no shame over what they have done, over their way of life. There is only sorrow over the loss of the material. They will really epitomize the words of Christ, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" That will be those who are really involved with this particular empire, this economic system. But then the chapter shifts there towards the end, in verse number 20. It says, "Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her." And so instead of the lament of the godless, we see the rejoicing of the heavenly, and that's where the chapter ends. The angel, now speaking to those in heaven, tells them to rejoice. It says specifically, "For God hath avenged you on her." And so we've read the prayers. We've seen them a few times in the book of Revelation already. We've read the prayers of those killed due to their testimony. We've seen the judgment upon those who did the killing here in chapter 18. And now we're told to rejoice. Why? Because it is the righteous judgment of God. God is just in what he's going to do to this city. God is just in what he's going to do to this empire. God is just in what he's going to do during the tribulation. Walvoord said it this way: it is another case where the righteous ultimately triumph as victory follows suffering. And so that is going to be prevalent again during this particular time. However, it's not just the martyrs you see there in verse 20, but it's also the holy apostles and the prophets that are specifically mentioned. Now, the prophets can rejoice because their prophecies are going to be fulfilled. The prophecies that they wrote about, this great day is finally coming to pass, and they can rejoice. The apostles can rejoice because they, like the martyrs of the day, were chastised, were rejected, most of them martyred for their particular belief and the things that they did for Christ. And so it's not just the tribulation saints that are rejoicing, that are crying out in praise here, but it is everybody, really. Everybody who's ever lived, who's been chastised for the cause of Christ, who's had difficulty or trial or tribulation because of being obedient and faithful. They can cry out and rejoice because this is, again, righteous judgment. Anytime you've ever prayed or asked God, I feel like I'm in the right here, and I've been doing everything that I can, and it's just I come up against wall after wall after wall, and these people are continuously against me. Go read through the Psalms. You'll see David pray like this consistently. A lot of times, God, get my enemies. And that comes from the righteous heart of a man that the Bible calls a man after God's own heart. And so this is when that's finally happening, and of course it will be a small preview compared to the final judgment that will be upcoming. But that will be kind of all-encompassing here as that it kind of kicks things off, I guess you could say. And so it's a little preview of the greater judgment to come. And then lastly, it says in verse 21, there's a kind of a demonstration of the judgment, I guess you could say. Verse 21, "And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, "Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all." And so this is a picture of the completeness of the judgment of God against this particular city. And so sudden and then gone, never to be found again. You can picture, a millstone. That would have been a rather large stone that they would grind grain with. And they were, again, they were pretty large. You can imagine somebody picking one of those up and tossing them into a body of water. That thing's not floating. That thing is sinking, and you're not going to find it again, if it's a large enough body of water. And so this is what he's talking about here. Just imagine that stone being tossed, and that's how sudden, that's how swift, and that will be the ultimate result of this particular city. Again, sudden, and then gone, never to be found again. And he goes on to explain that a little bit. He says, "No more will be heard any sound of music. No more will be heard any sound of work. No more will be heard the voices of the newlywed." And these are just kind of describing what we might think of the day-to-day activities. It's all gone. No light will shine, no candle. There in verse 23, "And the light of the candle shall shine no more." Now that's, I think, this is not one of those times where John is trying to describe something that to him would have been indescribable, seeing things yet in the future. We got to remember that one of the judgments that have just recently taken place was the elimination of light. That was one of the vile judgments where God, just smites out the sun and there's no light, and so they're using candles. I think that's what's in play here. They're using candles to light their way, their homes, and those aren't going to shine anymore. It's going to be done. It's going to be over because of the vastness and the wholeness, the completeness of this particular judgment. And of course, it will be justified. You see that in the very last verse of the chapter. It says, "And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth." Now, we don't need to give justification for what God is doing, but there's the justification for what God is doing. He's holy, He's just, He's righteous, and all of this. Now, throughout the Bible, and this is really an interesting thing, if you study the Bible kind of as a whole, throughout the Bible, God triumphs over the attempts to unite the world against Him through the workings of Babylon. And this is an interesting thing that starts very early in the book of Genesis. And we see the very first Babylon back early in Genesis. They tried to unite the world in worship and language, which is what the tower was being built for. Hey, we're going to build this great tower, and this is going to be a way for us to worship. And so what does God do? He scatters the people and He confounds the language. No, you're not going to do this. You're not going to unite the world against me. And then the religious Babylon in the world to come. The religious Babylon will again try to unite the world in worship. And then what's God going to do? He's going to destroy it. He's going to judge it. In fact, He's going to use the beast to do it. And so He's going to destroy this new Babylon. And then the last standing, the political, economic Babylon, will again try to unite the world in government and economy. And again, the wickedness and debauchery and all the things we've talked about. And it too, God will judge and destroy. And so time and time again, man has tried to say, we're going to do things our way, and we don't need you, and time again, and it will continue to happen. God's going to say, no, it's going to happen my way, because my way has been deemed from the beginning. And so from Babylon of old to the Babylon of the future, man has always tried to usurp God, and yet he has always and always will triumph. And that's kind of the key theme here of Revelation, is that God's plan of old will unfurl as God deemed it. His will is going to take place. He will triumph. It may seem bleak at times, and I can only imagine what Christians of the day must think as they go through such a terrible, terrible time. We think last year was bad. It's nothing compared to what's upcoming. And so, what they must be thinking as they go through this. But God will triumph. The gospel will triumph. The people will be reached, and the Antichrist ultimately will lose. And then this will be fully realized, and I'm really excited about what we get to next week. This will be fully realized in chapter 19 as we get to see, finally, the glorious return of Christ. And what takes place thereafter. And so, again, just chapter 17 and 18 are these parenthetical chapters, because really the narrative is going to jump back to what we ended with chapter 16. It really goes into chapter 19, but then you have these chapter 17 and 18 that talk about Babylon, both sides of it. And so that is the full destruction of this wicked, evil system put in place by Satan through Satan's man to try and take over what he probably feels is his. And now he's wrong, and he's going to be shown how wrong he is, and he will fall. And I think we could honestly say great will be the fall of it. All right, so that is the end of Babylon. As I said, I'm a little more excited about what we get into next week. That's kind of the high point of the book of Revelation.